This is a Christmas legend written by the Swedish author Selma Lagerlof. She was born in 1858 and was the first Swede and first woman to win a Nobel Prize. That was in 1909. Her life is fascinating. This is adapted from a longer version of the story as she wrote it. Long ago, there was a robber family who lived in the great forest. Robber father had stolen sheep, and the bishop had made him an outlaw. So the robber family had to go into the forest, and there they lived in the shelter of a deep cave, for they had nowhere else to go. Robber father hunted for food, and robber mother and the 5 children foraged in the woods for things to eat and gathered ferns for beds and wood for fire. Sometimes robber mother took her children into the village to beg, but they looked so rough and wild with their unkempt hair and their raggedy clothes. People were afraid of them, and they locked their doors when they saw them coming. But some people left bags of clothing and some food outside their doors for robber mother and her children. She scowled and muttered to herself as she walked through the village. Although they were people she had known before, not one of them would invite her in for as much as a cup of tea and a bit of small talk. One summer day, as she was trudging along toward home with her sack slung over her back, she noticed a door open in the wall of the monastery. She saw that there was a beautiful garden inside, filled with magnificent bright flowers. Honeysuckles, red roses, jasmine climbed up the walls, and she had never seen so many butterflies. She set down her sack and walked in. She bent down to smell the pink roses and smiled. Well, you can imagine how surprised the monastery gardener was when he came across this nasty-looking old woman in his beautiful garden. "Hi there! You can't come in here. This is the abbot's garden. No women are allowed in here. Be off with you." She looked up and scowled. "I'm doing no harm, and I'll go when I've found what I'm looking for. You'll go right now, or I'll throw you out." "Just you try," said robber mother, who was much bigger than the gardener and considerably stronger looking too. This only made the gardener angrier. He went off and he found 2 fat monks to help him with his eviction. Then she bit and she kicked and screamed and made such a noise. The old abbot came running out himself to see what all the fuss was about. "This woman won't leave our garden, Lord Abbot," said one of the monks. "Lead her to me, brothers. I'll deal with her." So he turned to robber mother. "Good woman, I expect you have never seen such a fine garden before. I suppose you might want to pick a few flowers." "I do not," she replied. "Yours is a fine garden, but it cannot compare with the one we have out in the forest every Christmas." "Is that so? Why, his garden was his pride, and it was said to be the finest in the land." But robber mother replied, "I'm not kidding, Brother Abbot. In the forest every Christmas Eve at midnight, the forest near our cave is transformed into a wondrous garden to celebrate the birth of the Christ child. We who live in the forest are the only ones who see it. All flowers of all seasons grow together there at the same time. And there are flowers there I would not dare to touch. They are so beautiful. They have frail silver petals and pale gold stamens. We call them Christmas roses. I don't see any of them in your garden. The old abbot began to listen more attentively. He remembered hearing as a child how part of the forest, the great forest, was transformed into a beautiful garden at Christmas. Oh, how his young heart had longed to see it. But as he grew older, he had forgotten about it. So he smiled kindly at Robber Mother. I have heard of your garden, and I would like to see it. Would you send one of your children to guide me to the spot this Christmas Eve? How can we be sure you will not drive us away from our cave if you know where it is? Oh, I wouldn't do that, said the abbot. Instead, I'll ask our Lord Bishop to grant your husband a free pardon in return for such kindness. You would do that? Yes, I would do that, said the abbot. Yes, I shall ask, said the old abbot. But whether my Lord Bishop will grant my request, I do not know. I trust you, said Robber Mother. My eldest boy will wait for you Christmas Eve beside the great oak at the entrance to the forest and bring you through to our cave. He will wait for you by the oak, but you must promise to bring only one companion with you, perhaps this grumpy gardener of yours. I promise, said the abbot. He blessed Robber Mother, and she left the garden and returned home. The abbot went to see the bishop and told him of everything that had happened. If God allows the robber family to see this miracle, there must be some good in them, Reverend Bishop. Will you not give Robber Father a free pardon and a chance to live and work like our own people? Their children are growing up rough and wild in the forest. If we don't do something now, we will end up with a gang of robbers, and that won't do anyone any good. There is some truth in what you say, my abbot, replied the bishop. All right, I don't believe the story of the Christmas rose in the miracle garden, but if you can go, and I grant you permission to go, and bring me back one of those Christmas roses, I will grant Father Robber a free pardon. You have my word. Well, Christmas Eve came. The abbot set off, trudging through the drifting snow, with the gardener at his side, toward the great forest to look for the oak tree and the child of Robber Mother. Well, the gardener was none too happy, as you can imagine. He didn't want to be spending Christmas Eve trudging through snow, thinking about his own cozy little cottage with a warm fire, his wife sitting beside the hearth, plucking the goose. However, he loved the old abbot and did not want to disobey him. Onward they tramped toward the forest, and sure enough, there was the robber's son waiting. He led them through the forest to the cave where the family was inside, sitting around a fire. Robber Father was stretched out on dried bracken, relaxing and watching his children play a game with some stones. Robber Mother welcomed him. Good evening, Reverend Abbot. You're a little early, but you may have a nap and wait until it happens, and I will wake you just in time. The gardener was a little suspicious about this, and he said, well, I'll watch over you too, Reverend Abbot. So the abbot lay down and had a little nap. He hadn't been asleep too long when he awoke to the sound of bells pealing. Bells? We're too far out in the forest to hear the bells. Robber Mother said, come now, Reverend Abbot, it is time. The time is near. The whole family, the robber and the gardener, walked to the cave. Everything was still dark and cold. Nothing's happening, said the gardener, becoming even more annoyed and even more suspicious. Just wait, said Robber Mother. And they all looked out at the wonder of the snow falling in the deep forest. Then something happened. The chilly wind died down. The darkness of the forest began to transform until it was pink dawn. And now light sprang forth, the snow melted, and green sprouts began to appear in the ground. Birds began to fly through the trees and sing. Butterflies, too. The robber children romped and played in the garden. The abbot looked in wonder at all the amazing flowers, all blooming at once. And then he looked down at his feet, and there, just beside him, on the floor of the forest, was a little plant with silver leaves and petals rising up, and little gold stamens in the middle. Oh, it is a miracle, a wonder. The gardener looked and, this is no miracle. This is witchcraft. This is the work of the devil. As soon as those words were out of his mouth, it went dark. The wind began to blow. The snow came back. The abbot knelt down on the ground and put his hands around the Christmas rose and collapsed. The robber family were furious. The gardener lifted up the abbot, placed him over his shoulder, and took him back to the abbey, where he died quietly and peacefully with a smile on his face. As they laid him out, the monks said, oh, at least he died with a happy smile on his face. When they looked more carefully, in his hand, they saw several roots of the plant that he had seized as he fell. The monks all agreed that the gardener should take this root and plant it in the abbot's garden to see what would happen. He did, and he watched all through the spring. In the summer, up came green shoots, leaves, but nothing else. Fall came, leaves fell, fall flowers bloomed and died, and nothing happened. He walked out in the first snows and still saw nothing but the sprout of that plant coming through the snow. On Christmas morning, He walked out into the garden, and there before him, not just the leaves, but silver petals reaching up around a rose with gold stamens. And he knew what he had to do. He picked a few of the flowers and ran over to the bishop. When he got there, he knocked at the door and he said, "Holy Father, here is something I have for you." The abbot kept his promise. Here's the Christmas rose. Now you must keep your promise and write the robber father a full pardon. The bishop smiled. Indeed, I must. He wrote out the pardon right then and there and gave it to the gardener to take back to the forest to give to robber father. When he got to the cave, the doorway was blocked by a very angry robber father and robber mother. You, because of you, there was no Christmas garden here in the forest tonight. You have spoiled everything. I'm very sorry, said the gardener. It is all my fault. I did not have faith. You ruined everything. I feel like punching you, said robber father. I have your pardon, said the gardener. Robber father looked at him a little suspiciously. Yes, here it is. Here, you are pardoned to come back and live in the village in your old house with all your friends around you. And so it was. The robber family left their cave in the forest. They came back to live in their house. They reconnected with their neighbors. And what a Christmas celebration they had. And it is my wish that you may all celebrate whatever you wish to celebrate at this time of year, in warmth and comfort and cheer. The Christmas rose.